YouTube, this is Pat with Rain Country. Today I have with me, behind me, and with me, is a country living grain mill. We bought this little mill about 3 years ago, and I told Heidi, I says, well, you better get the one that's got the pulley on it, because if you don't, you're going to be kicking yourself in the end, because you're going to want to have this thing motorized. Well, that never happened. She likes to do it by hand because it gives her exercise with her upper body and her shoulders and her strength of her hands. But sometimes, like as I say, our lives are getting a little bit busier all the time. And, well, we're not getting any younger either. So we want to try to automate a few things when we can, and still do off-grid stuff as much as we can. So what I have here is a little old Packard motor, and because the casing on the motor looked really old, I wanted to do a little research on the motor, and I found out that it's it could be anywhere as old as 1940s or as young as 1950s. I'm thinking it's about a 1950s vintage motor. It's a 5 amp 750 RPM motor, and it runs really smooth. It's so old that it's got the oil cups on it. And so I thought that was pretty cool. You know, I like old tools and stuff. So anyway, I'll stop rambling on about that. I'll take you around to the back, kind of show you what we got. To test run this thing, I called the manufacturer, and in their book they recommend 60 RPM. The manufacturer, a representative I talked to, he had mentioned, well, they don't like to see anything over 60 to 70 RPM on the wheel here. And the reason for that is your wheat berries, when it comes into flour, could kill the enzymes coming off here due to heat. This thing gets too hot, then there can be some caking and some burning of the wheat that would happen on the back side of this plate. Talking to the manufacturer, you know, he says, well, if your plate doesn't get too hot, well then it wouldn't be a concern. The only concern out there would be the plate's getting too hot and then wearing out too soon. Then you just have to replace the plate, or obviously the bearings. You know, you got bearings running in here. I would assume that there's a bearing on this end and a bearing on this end of the shaft, and then a solid shaft running through here. None of that got hot. This got a little bit warm to the back side of my finger, but after, I don't know, I think I ran it for 5 minutes, and it didn't get hot to the point where it was uncomfortable to the touch. And so I rested the back side of my finger on the plate, on the wear plate here, and everything seemed relatively cool. Obviously, even when you hand grind with using the handle, this plate is going to be just a little bit warm, just because of the friction that happens there. But obviously, the faster that thing turns, the more kinetic energy you're expending, and the more friction you're having, and so you're going to have more wear, and it's going to heat up due to that. Anyway, we're going to give this thing a shot. And just within a couple minutes, we got quite a bit of flour ground there. Now again, I put my fingers back there. It's almost just body temperature back here. So now I had this temporarily pinned down by these 2 or 3 quick clamps on the mounting flange for the motor. I want to go ahead and make a little bit more permanent setup now that I know that the application is sound and it works. So if I want to get this thing as perfect as I can get it, I want to be able to have this straight edge contact all the points on the pulley, to have a perfect 90 in between the shaft that runs back through the motor. I want these shafts to be perfectly parallel to one another, and I want these to be perfectly in line with each other. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm getting all this stuff set up straight. I'm going to get a rubber hammer and tap that into place to where it's just right. Okay, as you can see, I marked out the very edge of the mounting flange there to where I can take the belt off, line everything up, pre-mark my holes, and then come back in and bolt everything in place. See, I marked just inside this here, so that can slide back and forth. So I'll put the bolt not quite clear to the end, but I'll give myself some adjustment. And I did that on the other side. So I got this hanging out here. Haven't quite decided what I want to do about that. So I'll go ahead and get this thing unclamped and take a closer look and do a little more thinking. Now with the belt and the clamps off of the motor and the belts, I can, with my lines, I know where the edge should be for the tension, and I can verify square with the straight edge a little easier now that the motor is easier to turn and set into place. I know what my forward and back tolerances are, and so now I just want to make sure that everything is square and true with the motor and the pulley. Already checked this shaft. The shaft is very straight. This is a very clean little old motor, and I think it's going to work wonderfully in our application here. So all my holes all my edges here are lined up nicely. I might just take and mount a piece of wood in here to fill this in. I might just leave it. It's never going to be seen. Nobody's ever going to be back behind this, so I don't think it really matters a whole lot. So again, most of what I do, I kind of think on the fly. I do a little bit of planning and re-engineering and planning as I go, and so I'll go ahead and remove this now. Okay, what I got here is I have this up here set at 5 1/8. I have this set up here at 5 1/8. This at a 1/2 inch, and that's set up at a 1/2 inch. So the other thing I could check is to make sure that this is square to the table. Pilfered this stuff here from the shop in my spare nuts and bolts bins, and this is what I came up with to mount that motor on this table here. So first thing I'll do is I'll make this bolt the same size, same length as this one here, and thread it. Get the same thread count, I just get a die out of the tap and die set. That looks like it's about the right count. I can take the piece that I'm trying to duplicate and run it in there if I can keep a hold of it without burning my fingers. I don't need to go all the way down the shank on this because most of that's just going to be penetration through that edge piece on the counter. There we go, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, we're back at the project site here. Now I'm going to go ahead and just drill a pilot hole. Obviously you want to be right in the middle of that, because when I drill from the bottom side of this, I don't want a big gaping hole on the back side of this front trim piece. So that is 3/4, so I want it to be 3/8. Okay, I got my basically my pilot holes tapped, so everything I drill from here on out will drill out according to those. So now the bolt obviously goes in the top. I want that just to barely be able to grab a hold of the threads on the bolt. Then to suck that down before I put the motor on there, I just draw that in, and those little cleats will suck up tight into the hole, and there we go. So I'll take that, loosen that back off, do the same thing to the other side. Well, I'm out here in the shop this morning having a cup of coffee, and thought I'd come out and take a look at the motor. I sprayed this last night before bed, and I think it turned out okay. I asked Heidi the other day, I was kind of torn on making this the traditional gloss black that they usually painted these old motors in. Most of the old motors you'll find are painted black or a gray. But I went ahead and painted this with the Hammerite paint. Here's the mount, the motor mount that supports the motor, obviously. I like to peel the tape in towards the piece I have taped up, so that way it won't accidentally tear the new paint off the other way. In the case I didn't do the prep work very well, and I did lots of sanding, and then I wiped this down with a solvent and cleaned it up real well. So the paint should be on there real well. Roughly 1.5 cups of flour this ground in a minute. So anyhow, this was kind of fun. Thanks for watching.